There we go. I never actually know how long it takes the recording to kick in. So
Yeah.
I know most of my videos, I'm like staring off at the button, but we are recording. Okay. Hey, everybody. So what we're doing today, we've got Emily with us. I'm super, super excited, especially for this topic of grief, which is nothing to be excited about, but exciting to have someone who knows how to help us through this. I am a stress and anxiety management coach, so it is my mission to help people realize that improving the quality of life, getting that stress and anxiety under control, it is life-changing. I know for myself, when I was that busy, like sun up to sundown, collapsing on the side of the bed, doing the blank stare, like there has to be a better way, and there is. So that is my goal, is to really help everyone realize that and help them find their better way of life so that they can actually, enjoy life and be happy. And like, this is the thing, we don't have to try and be Wonder Woman, like running all over, doing everything, collapsing into bed, like, yelling into our pillows on weekends. And, but having said that, even though I deal with the stress and anxiety, I am terrible at grief. So I'm very excited to have you here because even though I've dealt with a lot of grief in my life, I am a super logical type A, well, you can't bring them back, so let's carry on. And it just doesn't work. And even like my own mom, this is an example of my personality. It was like, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years or something. She calls me and she's like, do you know what day it is? And I'm like, no, I don't, Mom. And she's like, it's your Oma's birthday. And I'm like, my Oma died when I was 14. And I'm like, right? I'm just like, okay, like, noted. Love my Oma. She was a huge, huge part of my life, like huge. But, and my mom's teary and I can hear her kind of crying. And I'm like, it's been decades, Mom, like, right? So I just, I don't quite know how to really deal with those different emotions of, like, I'm not that emotional person. So I'm going to say I'm probably one of the last people on earth to get grief counseling or advice from, because I'll be like, well, what are you going to do? Which is not helpful. So having said that, give us your backstory. I think if I remember, it's similar to mine. Like, you've lived it, you've done it, you are really, it's your journey. So everything.
Well, thanks for having me, Sonia. I think you said a lot of things that are very common with people and dealing with grief. But unfortunately for me, I am way too familiar with grief. I lost my father 12 years ago, and then I lost my husband just about 2 years ago. So it'll be 2 years in June next month. And, what I would say is that a lot of the things you said are a lot like how I am too, of wanting to just kind of put my head down, power through it. And I found success with that with my father, right? Like, obviously it was very traumatic, but you expect your parents to pass, right? Like, he was a little young. I was still, rather young at the time, but when my husband died, and died young, and died very suddenly. He had a heart attack, and I was just really unprepared for the emotions that went along with that. And it was not serving me to be able to put my head down and power through as much as I tried. So I learned a lot about grief, and I spent 20 years of my career working for large publicly traded companies, and then most recently working for smaller startups. And one of the things that I always loved about working in that industry was working with people. I loved coaching people. I loved mentoring people. I loved working with my employees and managing people and helping them to advance in their career. I felt a lot of had a lot of just really good experiences of that. And so after my husband died, it took about a year and a half to kind of like move through it. But I started realizing that I felt like I could help other people, to your point, that maybe didn't know much about grief, didn't know how to move through it. you know, and I would say, you know, a disclaimer is that I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed counselor. I am more of like a life coach for grief, and I have a grief certification. But really, I'm focused on really helping people, primarily widows. I'm most interested in obviously helping other widows or widowers that are ready to kind of move forward, that have said, okay, like I've accepted my loss, and now I want to figure out how I can live a life without that person or my person in my life, and how I can find joy and meaning. So that's really where my business is focused.
Well, and you know, that actually is a very good point too, when you mentioned, you know, that your husband died suddenly, because I know my father also passed away. I was 19, but it was cancer, and thank God it was very fast. It was about 6 months diagnosis to passing, which is huge blessing. You know, in my line of work, positive in everything. And so I am thankful it was very quick for him. But it also gave us, we had 6 months to what I would call pre-grieve. And then when he passed, and it was funny because I remember the day he was in the hospice care and all that, and the day I drove away for the last time, I did cry driving away, because I just knew I would never see him again. This was it. It was done. And when I got the call, it was 11 o'clock at night, and it was interesting because I'd had those 6 months, and when I got the call, it was kind of like, okay, it's finished. The door is closed. And I think for myself, I will always consider myself lucky. Obviously, not that I lost my father, but I lost him in that manner, because I'm going to say this is the easiest grief to go through, is you have that prep time. You can say goodbye, you can kind of arrange things. But to me, it's traumatic for that sudden, just that phone call, or the cop shows up at your door, whatever it might be.
Right.
And yeah, so I guess maybe let's start with this, is you've had kind of the both sides of the coin sort of thing. So are there very huge differences? Like, my assumption would be, obviously, that, you know, being able to pre-grieve, maybe grandma's been passing for months or whatever, a little bit, in my opinion, easier. So what are the major differences in those stresses, those emotions, perhaps, from having that? I would think, like, even maybe taking longer just to accept the event, like,
Yeah, I think, yes, I have done both. Unfortunately, I've had both sides of the coin. My father also passed of cancer, and he died 8 months after his diagnosis. So for sure, went through those emotions, and you know, sort of pre-grieved. You know, knew what was coming. It was the roller coaster of like, maybe he'll get better. No, he's not getting better. And then with my husband, it was sudden. I think the difference that I saw, certainly in how I reacted with grief, and I think how others react to grief, is the relationship that you have with the person who passes. So I had a wonderful relationship with my father, but, you know, I was in my 30s at the time. I was married. I had a life. I had a job, and my day-to-day didn't really change a lot, right? Like I talked to my father and my mother, you know, once or twice a week on the phone. When my husband died, all of a sudden my whole life changed, right? Like, you know, he was here with me every day, and we, you know, we were together for 24 years. So, so that, I think it has a lot to do with how people react to death. Oftentimes has to do with the relationship they had with the person who passed. You know, you might go to a coffee shop every day, and you show up one day and the woman who makes your coffee is not there, and someone, oh, she passed away. You might feel sad you might get in your car and go, gosh, that's terrible. Like, you know, I feel so awful for her family, and you might feel sad for a day or two, and then you're going to move on with your life. When a child or a spouse, or even a parent, maybe that you're extremely close with, or even a sibling or a very close friend. I mean, there's a variety of situations. Oftentimes the grief will be more prolonged. It'll take a lot longer for somebody to kind of work through all the emotions to get to that, you know, sort of acceptance of, okay, like they're gone and they're not coming back, and like, how am I going to live my life without them?
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point, where you kind of do, because even when my dad passed, I was, in university. I'm on road construction in the summers, and I just remember, like, one day I just went to call him and remembered he had passed. Obviously, then I had kind of temporarily forgotten because he wasn't a part of my day-to-day. So yeah, I again, I wouldn't have thought of that. So yeah, that's a very, very good point. And actually leads my thought process to another thing of, I assume you deal with it, but correct me if I'm wrong. Let's say you don't have a great relationship, having to deal with the guilt that might come.
Yeah. Guilt is a strong emotion. And, there's a range of emotions that can happen with grief, physical, mental, emotional. No two people are going to grieve the same way. And, I had guilt, and I was, obviously very, very close with my husband. I had guilt on, like, I should have done this. I could have done that. What if I did this, you kind of play the what if game. But yeah, you do see that a lot with grief, of people who maybe have regrets of, I never had that conversation that I wanted to have, or I was never able to make amends. I've met with people whose husband, was abusive, or, and so then there's like the range of emotions of, like, I don't feel sad, I feel relief. And I think some people have that too in your situation with someone has a prolonged illness, and then they maybe feel relief, right? They feel relief that that person's not in pain anymore. Maybe they feel relief that, like, oh, I don't have to watch this person I love suffer. And then from there they feel guilt. And so those are all natural emotions and natural things that happen in grief. And it's just working through it, and trying to just recognize and acknowledge those emotions as normal. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy. It's just the way that I like to describe it, and there's actually a lot of science behind it, is it's actually your brain is actually, like, rewiring itself to accept the loss. Your brain is wired in a way, certainly when you spend some time with someone, like, when you're married or with a child, and, every day at 5 o'clock, that person walks in the door, your brain is wired to remember that. And so it takes a while for your brain to kind of rewire itself to say, okay, that person's not walking through the door at 5 o'clock, or the things that the kind of the things that you were just used to in your everyday life are different and have changed. So it takes time. And you gotta have to, like, unfortunately with grief, you have to kind of feel it to get through it.
Yes, I do know that much. And that's, I feel like it's similar in all aspects, like even in my line with just the regular stress and anxiety, trying to, you feel like the anger, the anxiety comes up, and the first thing people tend to do is try and block it, and, like, oh, I can't feel this, I can't deal with this, like, push it away. And then you think, no, but what you have to do is acknowledge it. Why is it happening? Realize it's okay, and it's perfectly natural, and then sort through it in order for it to go, in my case, go away, the anxiety, to deal with it. But if you just try and push it away, it's just going to keep, like, I don't know, like some crazy person at the door, just keep coming back. And so I think that's super important with grief especially, but all emotions. You cannot ignore your emotions. It leads no place good. Like, they call it the bottling or stuffing, and you push it down. And then, I do thoroughly believe that this can cause things like ulcers or tumors or, like, literal physical ailments.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think there's probably medical, medical professionals that would support that, of, like, when you suppress emotions and stress and anxiety, it can lead to physical ailments for sure. And grief can be really painful. And so, oftentimes I just remind people to take the time and acknowledge the grief, acknowledge what you're feeling. Journaling can really help a lot, to write down what you're feeling. It helps you to kind of, like, work through, like, the why am I feeling this way. It also helps to, like, look back, like 2 months, a month, 3 months down the road, look back and go, wow, I actually have made some progress. I'm not as angry. I'm not as guilty. The sadness and the loneliness are, probably the hardest things that I dealt with, trying to like move through all of that and just being incredibly lonely after losing my husband. But yeah, you're right. You've got to kind of do the work, so to speak. And, I recognized really early on that I wasn't going to be able to do it on my own. And so, I did seek professional help, and it was extremely helpful just to have like someone to talk to about it, someone that understood what I was going through, and also somebody that told me you've got to slow down. To your point, I was like, I wanted to see this therapist, and I wanted her to give me the magic recipe. I wanted her to say, okay, if you do these 6 things, a month from now, you're going to feel better, because I didn't want to feel the way I was feeling. And the reality of it is like, there's no recipe. And for some people, like I mentioned, they move through grief really quickly. And some people, it takes a lot longer for them to kind of get towards that acceptance, and then being able to figure out how to live and move on with their life without that person who has passed.
Yeah, because I just even as a massage therapist, I did that for 13 years, where we used to live previously, and just having all my massage clients and obviously everything that happens in their lives. And I was kind of like, the proverbial bartender, where I heard all the things.
Yeah.
And some people, it would be interesting, and again, like, no judgment. It's just something I don't quite comprehend myself, because it's not my style, where, like years later, there still seem to be in a significant amount of grief. And again, it's not that I would judge them, but I would just think like, I really literally don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And but I guess, that's also, it's not my place to understand. I'm just a very curious person, where
sure.
I like to try to know everything.
Well, I mean, I think there's the things that I would say about grief. And when my dad passed 12 years ago, my husband obviously was still alive at the time, and he had lost his mother. And I said to him, it's about a week or so before my dad passed, and I said to him, how long does it take for you to get over the death of a parent? And he looked at me and he was like, you don't get over it. And I was like, what do you mean I don't get over it? Like, what do you mean I'm going to always hold this pain? And I was very naive. I hadn't really lost anyone close to me at that point in my life. And so, yeah, you never get over it. You never move on. It's always with you. Your grief is always a part of you, although you build around it. And there can always be triggers, right? Like, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, my dad had been gone for 10 years. My husband was still alive, and it was Father's Day, and I was scrolling through Facebook, and there was all these posts from people like, love you, Dad, happy Father's Day. And I just had a moment. I had a moment of just like, being extremely sad, and cried, and just, and I moved through it, but it's like, you get these like moments still years later that you can be overcome by grief. Like, somebody can just like trigger it, and then there's also a lot of research around, complicated grief and uncomplicated grief. Again, I'm not a therapist. I'm not a licensed counselor or a doctor. But complicated grief affects a very small portion of people who are grieving. And complicated grief is just like kind of to what you're talking about. Like, they can't move past it. And people that are struggling with that really, should seek very like medical professional help. But most people are able to move through it. They're able to be happy again and figure out how to live a life without the person that they lost. Remember them, tell funny stories about them. Again, it just takes time for everybody. Everyone's timeline is a little bit different, but, my message is like, you're going to get through it. You're going to get through it. And I remember thinking after my husband died, like, I'm never going to be happy again. I think I even said it, like, I'm never going to be happy again. I can't even imagine what happiness is right now, and here I am 2 years later, and, I am happy again. And so you do find that joy, but it takes time. And people like us are A-type personalities that are very practical and very pragmatic, just want to like check it off. Okay.
Yep.
I agree. I was sad. Now I want to be happy again. And that doesn't mean that you forget the person or that you've moved on from it, but I just didn't want to feel the pain anymore. That was how I felt for a long time.
And it's funny too, because I know exactly when you say like building around it. And I think that's exactly kind of what it is. It's like you subconsciously, purposefully choose these happy memories to like stack around that grief. And then so every time you think back, you still always have that sadness, but you've built this nice cocoon of happy memories and remembering them. And it kind of almost, and I think, so I'm just visualizing when you said like that 10 years later and just kind of a little bit out of nowhere. And it's just like that little nice, happy bubble had a little hole and there's your grief just spewing through all of a sudden.
Yep. And a lot of widows go through what we call secondary grief. So your spouse might be the person who took out the trash every day or did the cooking or, picked the kids up from school or whatever that is. And then all of a sudden you're put in the position to have to do that. And it could be that's the most minor thing, like rolling the trash can out. And it's another loss, right? It's like, oh, now I lost my person that does XYZ. And that takes time to kind of readjust your life to have to live in a way that you weren't before. And so we call that secondary grief. And that is real. I would say after my husband died, the first time I went to the grocery store, I got about halfway through the store, cart full of food, and I just walked out. I was like, I can't do it. I can't go grocery shopping because it was so traumatic, right? Like last time I was here, I was with him. I'm like seeing all, like, do I buy that? Like, I don't really like that food, but he liked it. I'm not going to buy it anymore. And it's just the littlest things can really set you off in the first, few months after you lose someone.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So even, literally like grieving the old lifestyle because you're never going to get that back.
Yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't have thought about that.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Holy.
It's a lot. Yeah, it is. And it's not just, we experience, a lot of widows experience it, especially, and widowers for that matter. Like my mother, I remember after my father died, like he did all the finances and she didn't have a clue how to do any of it. She was like, what bills do I need to pay? How do I take care? Like, how do I do all these investments that my dad had? And, that can be really overwhelming for widows and for people that are here trying to grieve their spouse. And then you have the stress of like, well, the bills still have to get paid. And I got to go to the grocery store and get food. And I got to figure out how to cook. And I got to take care of my kids or whatever it is. Life doesn't stop for grief. And so that's that leads into, where you're focused is like, that's where the stress and the anxiety sort of get piled onto grief. And people who struggle with anxiety prior to losing someone they really care about, it can really get exacerbated and can be extremely challenging to keep sort of moving forward.
Yeah, and that's a really awesome segue also, because I was wondering, from what I read, like little posts you had done on your profile and stuff and kind of checking some of your stuff out, it seems like grief stress is similar to your everyday normal stress, but it's different somehow. So I don't know if you can kind of put into words just how it's a little bit different, how it affects you differently.
Yeah. Again, I think it's different for everyone, but I think what I would probably say about that is that, yes, stress is stress, anxiety is anxiety. But then you layer on your grief on top of it. And so maybe you're going through life and you have, normal everyday stresses. I'm stressed about work. I'm stressed about paying my bills. I'm having anxiety about my kid playing football or whatever that, the thing is. It's like these normal things in life that you most likely have figured out how to manage, right? Or not, but, manage on some level. You're still living, you're still moving forward. Maybe you see a therapist, maybe you're on medication, maybe you do meditation, whatever that is. Then you pile on your grief, right? And you pile on this, the stress of losing someone very close to you. And all of a sudden, those sort of like everyday things become monumental. And it becomes almost in some ways very difficult to move forward with that. It certainly was something I experienced. I did a ton of meditation before my husband passed to help manage my anxiety. And after my husband passed, I was like, I can't even think about meditating. Like that makes me want to go crazy to even try to think about how I'm gonna like stay calm and like meditate at the moment. So things that were working for me to manage my anxiety before my husband passed all of a sudden weren't working for me anymore. And so I had to, figure out a new way forward and figure out how to adapt stresses, everyday anxieties on top of all the grief that I was going through.
Yeah, and I was just thinking too, if that meditation was a part of your previous life with your husband, that maybe even subconsciously thinking of meditating thinks of your previous life that you're now grieving, and now you have to come up with a whole new, holy,
yeah. So yeah, I think that's probably how I would answer that. Of just, it's the stress is still the stress, but it gets exacerbated because you're angry, you're sad, you're lonely, you're feeling guilty, you're like all the things that are associated with grief, you're also having to deal with. And so it just becomes it can become very monumental. And that's where, a grief coach like myself, or, if you need to seek more professional help and go on medication or something of that nature, can be extremely helpful. That would be my biggest message is like, don't suffer in silence. Like there's people and there's things that can help you to move through that, and who have been there, that understand what you're going through, and want to support you and help you to move through that, so that you don't have to live a life of sadness, anxiety, and stress.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because I always say, so I've had a naturopath for forever. I love my naturopath. And he would always say, your bucket is full. So I always use that metaphor with my clients and stuff, like, when you're overwhelmed, you're stressed out, it's because your life bucket is full. So even though the drop might be, your pencil broke or you ran out of eggs,
right?
You're still overflowing.
Yeah.
And I remember, because that was me. And that was kind of, one of the things I talk about when your bucket being full. It's literally, I remember one morning that we ran out of eggs, and I ate eggs for breakfast every morning. My world ended. Like I was this crazy volcano. I exploded. I threw tantrums because I could not handle anything. And that's like, again, where we are when we're overwhelmed. We literally can't handle anything. And I mean, it's very interesting, because obviously part of, getting overwhelmed under control is you have your lists, your schedules, you organize, and to some degree, I will say for myself, preventative. Make sure you don't run out of eggs. Where's your shopping list? Keep things more organized so you can be prepared for things. But literally, you can't organize grief. Like that's just
no. And that's where you need to reach out for help, right? And you can't, exactly. Like you might know. And I struggled with the same thing. I was extremely angry after my husband died. And I wasn't angry at him. I wasn't angry at the universe or at a higher being, or I was, to your point, like for me, it was, I dropped the dog's bowl of food. Like no big deal, like vacuum it up, get another bowl. And I lost it. And there were several experiences like that where I lost it. And so, I think that's where it's like, don't suffer in silence, like reach out for help. A lot of times when people lose people, there's a lot of people that show up, certainly in the first, days, weeks afterwards. And a lot of people will say, let me know what I can do to help. Let me know what I can do to help. And we don't ask, right? We're just like, we might be even too overwhelmed to ask. But everybody's got people in their lives. There's also community services of like, I need help. I need help, whether that's just like, can you help me like mow my lawn? Can you help me get to the grocery store? Just little things. And people, what I found is like, people want to help, they want to help. They just don't know what to do. And they don't want to infringe, they're like, well, I don't want to bother her. I know she's got a lot going on. And it's like, so the person who's grieving isn't going to ask. And so, for other people, just remembering that. But as the griever, don't be a martyr. Don't be a martyr. practice self-care, like give yourself grace. You can't do it all. You can't. And you know, it's especially if you had somebody close to you that passed, that the things that now you have to do, that's just more work. And then again, you pile on all your grief and everything else going on. It's impossible to do it alone. And so it's like, give yourself grace. To your point, what are the things that I absolutely have to get done? What are the things that I can put aside and say, nope, that's actually not that critical to do right now? And those things that I have to get done, how am I going to get them done? You know, am I going to do them myself? Am I going to ask for help? Are there services I can tap into? You know, it is a little bit about getting organized, and some people, you know, that some people it's really hard for them to do. But my experience is that people want to help. People want to be there for you.
Absolutely. And I would say the exact same thing, to the point where almost, I know one of the things I would hear from a lot of my clients just having the babies is something like, if I get one more casserole, but then they would follow it up with, because then they're like, you know, they haven't slept in 5 days and crying babies, and they'd always follow up with, no, I don't mean that. I'm so grateful. Like,
exactly.
But, yeah, people want to do this for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And oh, sorry, my laptop got disconnected here. There we go. I was about to run out of battery and I didn't even know it. Sorry. Oh. Apologies. And but you know, this is something I find in my work also, where it seems that as a society, help has become this 4-letter word. It is shameful, it is frowned upon. And I know I preach to my clients, like, in your list, is there someone going to Costco? You can, you know, e-transfer them, grab me this, this, and this. Is there, you know, the even in our neighborhood, we still had kids going around willing to shovel snow, willing to mow the lawns, like, right? Like, there's so many good people out there that still exist. Yeah. And for some reason, we just can't ask. And even, it's funny because I think even my clients that pay me, they're paying me, and I've had to be like, will you bother me, please? Right. I'm here to help. But and that's what they say, oh, I don't want to bother you. Like, how did this become a thing in our society? Right. Yeah. It is. I think we feel like we can just take on the world, especially as oftentimes as women. We're like, oh, you know, we'll be the superwoman. We'll take care of the kids. We'll have the job. We'll do all the things, and we'll be perfect about it. And men too. I mean, men, you know, they don't want to be a paralegal or unable to ask for help. But yeah, you got to ask for help, or you got to tap into those services that are available. You know, there's so many delivery services now, especially we were talking about COVID earlier before we got on the call, but you know, there's so many services that are available that can help you. And so take advantage of it. Yeah. And I think it's important to remember, and I love doing things like this too, because how many times I've had clients, whether in this business, massage or whatever, that don't realize their experience is very normal. What they're going through, you know, millions of other people have gone through. And it's kind of like, I don't know, again, why we've somehow got this idea that I'm the odd one, I'm the weirdo, I'm the only one that's doing it this way, or like the what's wrong with me syndrome. Nothing. And even not quite the same, but I do remember a client one time complaining about her husband doing this, this, and this. And I said, that's every guy. All husbands do that. And she's like, really? And I'm like, oh, yes. And it's funny because just that little conversation made huge impact for her. But it kind of was funny to me how somehow we think it's just us. But right. And I think, to your point of asking for help, there is a community out there. I feel like you will be surprised how many people have gone through, and maybe it's not literally the widow, but everyone knows someone who's passed, unfortunately. It's literally part of life, whether it's just, that's a terrible word. I excuse myself from that one. But a grandparent that has passed, or even like a pet, you know, maybe there's the teenager who's lost the pet. Like that's a huge first loss for something. That's going to be a pretty big impact on that life. And it's just, we've all experienced this to a degree or another. So like, and I'm sure
I was going to say grief. The crazy thing about grief is it's a universal experience. Yes. Everybody will go through it. And, I think losing a spouse at my age was hard because nobody could really, like I literally was like talking to my mom about, like, I was like, oh, this is a weird thing to have in common with my mother, right? We're both widows, but her experience was a lot different than mine for many reasons, right? Like, obviously they were older and, and everyone's experience is different, but grief is universal. And we are so, you started this interview today talking about it, of just like, we're so ill-equipped, I think, in this society to deal with grief. And I was extremely fortunate. I had an army of friends that surrounded me and continue to surround me to this day. But you hear a lot of stories of people who go through grief, especially widows or widowers, where they lose friends over it. Couples are like, oh, I don't really want to invite Sonia because, like, we're having a couples dinner and she might feel awkward. And all of a sudden you're like, well, why aren't you going to invite me? Like, we're still friends. Like, and so people lose friends, they lose connections over it because people don't understand it. They don't understand, or to your point earlier, like, gosh, you're still grieving this? It's been 10 years. Like, wow, I don't understand that. And so, I think it's part of, unfortunately, I always say, I joined a club I never wanted to join, right? Like, I was immediately accepted to a club that I never wanted to join. But people who have gone through these significant losses in their life, oftentimes are more empathetic, they're more compassionate because they get it. And it's probably a little bit about how you focus with your business of like, I've been there, I get it. I know that stress, and I know that moment that you're talking about in your bucket. I'm here to tell you your bucket's full and here's what you need to do. Right. So, yeah, I mean, I wish that people understood grief more. I wish that people understood loss of, like, can last a really long time and it can show up in a lot of different ways and people get uncomfortable with it. I think there's a lot of people that just want to be like, are you better yet? Like, can we just like go back to life we had before? And, they feel awkward. I went back to work. I took a month off of work. I was extremely fortunate to have a company that gave me a lot of grace. And I remember going back to work and like, nobody said anything to me. Like nobody even said like, oh, welcome back. We're so sorry for your loss. Like everyone just kind of like tried to like ignore it, the big elephant in the room, and nobody wanted to say anything because nobody knew what to say and they didn't want to say the wrong thing. And as someone who's grieving and someone who's lost, like that can be extremely isolating and extremely like lonely, and you're like, all I can do is think about my husband and nobody wants to talk about him. Nobody wants to say his name. Nobody wants to mention him. And that's like, most people who are grieving want to talk about the person they lost. That actually brings comfort.
Well, and something that, now this is just my opinion throughout my life experiences, is I have learned I'm going to say what I think is okay, and just get it out there. And we're both adults, so you can let me know if I shouldn't say that, which I have had said to me, like, nope, that's not funny. And I'm like, okay, I won't do that again. Yeah. But because I find that is better than just like, I don't know, you've now become this wallflower that doesn't need, human interaction anymore. You know what I mean? Right. Yeah. So I think just for any people who maybe have the coworkers watching this or something, like, go interact. And even if, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I've always been very awkward around people being emotional. I've had to really grow into my emotions in the last decade or so. When I was in my 20s, like, I remember my roommate in college crying and I literally left because I didn't know what to do. Product of the 80s, we don't talk about emotions. Yeah. But so I'm thinking what I would probably do in that situation is come up to you and have some general chit chat and then leave it up to you to bring up. But at least I'm going to acknowledge that you're back, and I personally don't believe in this is just me, love it or hate it, fair enough. But I don't believe in I'm so sorry for your loss, because Lord help me, if I heard that one more time, I was going to punch someone in the face. So that's just me. I generally don't say that to people. I've never found it helpful personally, but right. And
I think that's the hard part, right? And so that's why people don't say anything, because they're like, oh, I don't want to be, I don't want to, and I hear it all the time of like, and people, there's some people that don't even like the word loss or past. They're like, he died. I'm sorry that
Oh,
someone died. Like they just are like, let's just call it what it is. And so everyone is different.
yeah.
For me in my grief, I learned to let that roll off my back, especially if I knew the person was coming to me with positive intent, right? Like,
They
okay,
mean
like
well.
I had a friend that said, you got to keep busy. And I'm like, busy? I can hardly get out of bed. Like, how am I saying busy? Like, I'm like, I put my clothes on today. Like, that was a success, you know? But they didn't know, and they meant well. And so I did try to have grace with other people, but not everyone's the same. But I think it can be helpful just to say, you know, I'm sorry for your loss, or like, you know, welcome back, and I'm here if you want to talk, right? Like, or like, do you want to talk about it? No, you know, okay, great. But I'm here if you want to talk. I think that, you know, that can be a nice way to just let people know, thinking of you. I know this is a hard time for you. You know, I think just the checking in, I think that was the hard part with going back to work too, was like, great, I had the month off, but like, I wasn't better, you know, I wasn't, you know, and everyone I think expected me to perform the way I performed before my husband died. And the reality is like, I'm not going to be able to, like, I'm too distracted, and I'm going to do the best I can, but I might need to take a break in the middle of the day. Or I may need to, like, I was working remotely, and honestly, that was huge to be able to work remote after my husband died. But there were some days I was like, I'm not going to be on camera today. You know, I'm just not having a great day, and I'm just not going to stay on camera for meetings or certain meetings. So I think just as a coworker, you know, recognizing that of like, oh, Emily's on a camera today. It doesn't mean doesn't mean she's not engaged. Doesn't mean she doesn't care. It just means that like maybe she's having a bad day.
You know, and I feel like I've always been, to some people's points, brutally honest. I do believe in honesty. One of those, like, if you didn't want to hear the answer, don't ask me the question type thing. But
Yeah.
in that regard, I would say, like, let's bring in more honesty. I think to your point of, you know, telling your boss, like, I'm not better. This is what I might need. This is what might happen.
Mhm.
I'm going to do my best. But just so you know, and then even the coworkers, like, I don't think there would be anything wrong with walking up and being like, hey, Emily, I'm really happy to see your face, but I don't know what to say to you, but
Yeah.
I'm happy you're here and I'm just over there. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. That's it. Like, I think that's even just huge to go, I don't know what to say. And I had a lot of people go, I can't imagine. And I'm like, no, you can't imagine. And that's a fair statement. And I don't want you to have to imagine, you know, but just
Right.
knowing that they're acknowledging that something's not 100%.
Yeah.
And
No,
knowing they're
absolutely.
and then feeling the support, right? So
Yeah. So I was curious, you obviously you have a program. So can
Mhm.
you give us kind of a little overall view of what your
Mhm.
program kind of looks like?
Yeah. So um as I mentioned earlier, I think really where I try to focus my coaching is on people that are at that point in their grief where they're like, okay, like I'm ready to move forward. Some people, as we talked about earlier, come to their grief with unresolved trauma, unresolved mental health issues. Those people oftentimes, I think, will need to see more of a therapist or professionals. I think the difference between a grief coach and like a grief counselor or therapist is a therapist or counselor usually has a tendency to look back in life to say, okay, what are the events that got us to here, and how did those events impact how you're feeling today? Whereas a coach, and what I focus on is helping people to like figure out the life they want to live without the loss that they've had, or the person in their life that they've lost, and how can I help you get there? How can I help you build that? And it doesn't mean that we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about you know, how you're feeling and the day to day, and it doesn't mean it's not that I'm not there to like support you through the day to day of the emotions, but really trying to help people to guide them through figuring out how they get to the other side, and how they find joy and how they find meaning, because I was able to do that, and I really feel passionately about helping others do that. All that to say, mental health can be financially challenging for some people. So I've really built my business in a way that I offer free resources on my website, so people can download free PDFs of like how to plan a funeral, or like, how do you honor your late spouse? And that can be something comforting, certainly for people who are early in their grief, maybe aren't ready to talk about it or open up to somebody about it. I'm also in the process of launching some online video modules that people can, it's a lower price point, they can download it, do it in their own time. It's self-guided. There'll be some worksheets. And then I offer one-on-one coaching as well. That's probably the most impactful, is the one-on-one coaching. It's a 12-week, I say it's 12-week program. And I really try to mirror or create it in a way that's helpful for the person that I'm meeting with. So I do a free 30-minute consultation. We talk about your loss. I do really specialize, obviously, in working with widowed women, but I've lost my husband. There's a lot of things that I feel like I'm equipped to help with. But yeah, spending 30 minutes talking about their loss, where they are in their grief, what they're looking for, what they're hoping to accomplish with having a coach. And then we build, sort of a 12-week program based on that. If you visit my website, which is awakenrenewcoaching.com. So my coaching business is Awaken and Renew Grief Coaching. There's no grief in the URL though. I do have 3 different programs. One is, so that's the first sort of like, okay, let's just like recognize the emotions that you're having. Let's move you past the shock and denial phase of, oftentimes what you feel at the beginning of a loss. And then I have resilience, which is how do you tap into your resilience? How do you tap into your strength? Your strengths, we focus on like, what are your core values? What are your strengths? How can you leverage those things to move through this? And then acceptance, which acceptance is really like building the meaning and what are you going to take from this? And how are you going to grow and move forward in your life? Those are just examples. I put those on my site so people can understand, like, I tailor programs based on where they are in their grief and what they want to accomplish in working together. So it's a 12-week program. I do offer email support during those 12 weeks. So somebody can email me. I respond, Monday through Friday within 24 to 48 hours. If, they're like, hey, I came out of that session and was thinking about this, or like, went to the grocery store today, left my cart full of groceries. I'm feeling, really terrible about that. And we can email about that. And then I oftentimes will just recommend, depending on where they are, like self-care at home. What are some self-care things that you can practice? Some people that are earlier in their grief are like, yeah, I don't want to meditate. Yeah, I don't want to, I don't want to do those things. But self-care can be the basics of like, are you eating? Because I didn't eat. I lost a lot of weight and my husband died. Are you sleeping? Are you going out for moderate exercise? Like, those are the basics of like where you would start with self-care. And then, you can sort of build from there, making sure that you're taking care of yourself first as because if you're not healthy and you're not doing self-care, it's so much harder to grieve. It's so much more exhausting.
And that's it. And I know for myself, because self-care, just that word, has gotten such a bad connotation in a lot of places. Oh, I'm just laying on the couch watching Netflix all day. Like, no. So what I always clarify with everyone, anytime I do a video or whatever, I'm like, self-care is literally caring about yourself, period. So yeah, to your point, did you eat? Yes. You need to care that you're nourished. And I agree that that's a big one. Because even in my line of work, it's like, if you're depleted and you're running on fumes, it's that, your family suffers. It's not just you. You think that you're doing it for your family, for others, because I need to come last. But we actually have the opposite, unintentionally have the opposite effect, where they suffer more. Our business, work, whatever that is, suffers more. Like, everything suffers because we're so depleted. We're the junk car trying to or my boyfriend will hate this, but the Volkswagen trying to make it up the hill.
Yeah.
Like, we're leaving, we're way back there.
Right.
Whereas if we just take care of ourselves, we're that Porsche, we're up that mountain in 30 seconds and we've got time to spare for everybody and everything else.
Yeah.
And I feel like again, in our society, that's been lost somehow. Self-care is selfish. No, it's not. Because when I'm healthy, I can take care of everyone else around me,
Right.
plus people down the block.
Yes. And when you're grieving, or even in the situations that you're dealing with like, stress and anxiety, self-care isn't like, oh, I'm going to sit on the couch and watch Netflix and eat bonbons. Self-care literally is like, I'm going to go for a walk around the block and get some fresh air. I'm going to make sure that I eat lunch today and not work through lunch, so that at 3 o'clock I crash and burn. I'm going to, go to bed at a decent hour. I'm going to put my phone away so I'm not on my phone scrolling through reels till 2 a.m. Like it's basic things. Now, self-care can also mean, reading a book, watching your favorite TV show, listening to music. But what I found often for people who are certainly in that acute stage of grief, like that's like reading a book. I couldn't read a book. I couldn't concentrate. It's like, it's focusing on the basics. Like, let's get back to the basics of like what you need to feel good about yourself and physically and feel healthy. To your point, then you can help others. Someone who's grieving, then you can focus on grieving, right? Like it's exhausting to grieve if you haven't eaten and you haven't slept. And exercise can be hard too. I mean, I am an avid mountain biker. My husband died in June of 2022. I didn't get back on my bike until June of 2023 because I live in an environment that was winter all winter. It was winter and snowy, but like I couldn't ride that summer because I did not have the energy. I didn't have the strength. I just didn't feel like I had the endurance to get on my bike. And so I didn't, that was my self-care. I was like, okay, give myself grace, summer off, and I'm going to, take my dog for a walk. And that was enough. And, so it goes a little bit with like giving yourself grace too, of like self-care doesn't mean you have to like run a marathon and eat the healthiest food and, do all these things. It's just like, what can you do today to help yourself feel better?
That's it. Just that little piece of, I care that I'm a human being that's alive. What can I do to care for myself?
And how you would care for others. I mean, you wouldn't deprive a friend or family member a meal, or you wouldn't deprive, so why is it okay for you to do it to yourself?
You know what? And it's funny because I literally just touched on this. So I have a private Facebook group where I have the weekly support chats. And anyway, I just talked about this morning about, you need to ask yourself what you put yourself through. Would you do that to your mom, your sibling, your child, your best friend? And if the answer is no, then you need to reevaluate.
Yes.
And and it's this, we don't realize what we're doing. It's almost like we have these horse blinders on where we cannot see how poorly we treat ourselves. Because it's like, are you not a human being? Are you not a person? Are you not a member of this household, of this friends group? Then why do you get to be Cinderella sleeping with the pigs out back? Like, it's really quite an interesting topic. And even I will say too, I don't think this relates as much to grief, but just for a lot of the moms out there, that all the kids, they're little sponges and they learn from us. So not to put the heavy burden on the shoulders type thing, but they are absorbing everything. And even unfortunately in your case where your husband died very young, almost to have that piece of, once you're capable to think of other people and get out of bed and get dressed, that they are watching. And I know just for my line of work, you are teaching the kids that, when you have kids, you cease to exist as a parent. And if you don't want that life for other people, then you need to stop having it for yourself, because other people are seeing, right? If you happen to be a business owner, or like I know for you and I, like you need to set the example, right? And everyone has someone else that the example is being set for. Now, I do understand in grief, that's different. I don't know, your first however long, you just need to deal with you and get you under control. And it is a whole different ball game, but I think it is just that almost like little side note in the back that these little eyeballs are watching.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think you know, even as it does relate to grief, wouldn't it be wonderful if somehow we could all come together and have this emotionally regulated lifestyle where we grow up with emotions and we could actually teach kids like, oh, this is natural. Oh, look. And instead of stuffing and trying to.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's, you know, I think, I don't know, somehow we keep talking about COVID today because we were talking about it earlier, but I think that is like mental health has definitely, I think, been pushed more into the forefront, you know, since COVID and since the pandemic. I think people are more aware of, we were talking earlier about being able to work from home, and that, like, you know, when I first started working from home, if my dog barked, I was like horrified. You know, I'm like frantically trying to find the mute button. And now they bark, and I'm like, oh shoot, sorry about that. Someone must be at the door, or someone's walking by, and everyone's just kind of like, yeah, no big deal, don't worry about it. Like, we're human beings, first and foremost. And so I do think there's a movement I see, certainly, of like, it's okay not to be okay, and you know, and some people don't buy into it, but yeah, I hope that mental health has become a little bit more mainstream, and that people are more understanding that, you know, we aren't robots. You know, I mean, every day I always have a mantra of like, everyone has a story, you know. And I remember when after my husband passed, and I would go out in public, and I would go to the grocery store and whatever, be out in public, and I couldn't make eye contact with people because I didn't want someone to say to me, hi, how are you today? Because that was a really hard question for me to answer. And that is a greeting that we use. And of course, the natural response is fine. How are you? Or good. How are you? And I remember thinking, like, people probably think I'm really rude, you know, like that I'm just sort of like head down doing my thing. And so when I see other people maybe behaving in a way that seems odd to me, or maybe different how I always remind myself of like, something might be going on, you know, like everyone's got something going on. Everyone's got a story. And if we can all just like have some compassion and kindness towards other people, I think, yeah, to your point, the world would be a better place.
Yeah. That's yeah, one can hope, you know, and it is very interesting that COVID did bring about, as horrible as it was, there were quite a few positives of it, like the working online, being able to communicate. Like, I've never before, you know, been able to just ring someone up in Australia and be like, hey, this is perfectly normal. What's up? So it is great.
Yeah.
And I do think, to your point of like with the mental wellness, we've come to realize how incredibly important human contact is, conversing, like having all things we took for granted before. And when we didn't have it, that this is a big deal. And it's, well, you already said it, to realize mental health is a thing. And I think in Canada, what are we, 60% of youth are on antidepressants now or something?
Wow.
Like, when I was a kid, that wasn't, children were not depressed. This was not a thing ever. And now we have like pretty much the whole population. You're just like, I want to say like 90, 80 or 90% of adults on some sort of antidepressant medication.
Wow.
Like, it is insane. And I think, you know, part of that, I'm going to blame our generation. We were not raised to talk about emotions, or, you know, we pretended to be robots, and it was all about this image to portray, that now my generation has to get over and kind of reprogram. But it's just, yeah, it just makes everything so much harder if we just don't recognize it. It's a funny, crazy place we put ourselves in, but hopefully those horrible couple years have really, twisted and shot a light, and
it brings perspective, for certain. I'm sure, you know, most people that are listening and have lost someone significant in their life, or someone that they really loved. It brings perspective, you know, of what really matters. Where do I want to focus my energy? Where do I want to focus my time? And like I said, I think oftentimes makes us, people who have gone through significant loss, makes us more empathetic and more compassionate towards others. Now, of course, I would much rather have my husband here than to have learned that lesson through losing him. But you know, that's the reality, and that's really where I try to focus my business. And then working with clients is, okay, like you've been given a card and it's a really bad card and it sucks. Like at the end of the day, it sucks. But how are you going to, what do you want to do with that? And it's not something that happens overnight. I don't want people to think that I'm saying, oh, get over it, move on, or you just got to keep living. Like that is not at all my message. And I'm not saying that everyone has to like become a grief coach and like find all this meaning, but do you want to continue to live and be happy, and the person that you lost, what would they want for you? And how can you let go of the guilt of being happy again? And that is a real thing. Like it is a real thing to be like, oh, I feel like people are expecting me to be sad. They're expecting me to show up in a certain way. And if I don't show up that way, maybe they're going to think I didn't love him that much, or maybe they think I moved through it too quickly, or, whatever those stories are we make up in our heads. How can we just let those go and actually get back to living a life, or even creating a new life that we didn't live before? That everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone deserves to be happy.
That's what I say.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I will say, just a side note, and I know you definitely, and I won't say people should not see therapists or counselors. I think they're a valued part of mental health and stuff. But it is interesting to me where I do know therapists that have transitioned into coaching because they find it much more useful, because like they said, and we've heard this, like even you had said, and I've not personally experienced, but I know from people in my life, the therapists do tend to focus solely on the past. And now I'm not sure, there's all different kinds. Some people graduate with a C, some people graduate with an A. And again, I'm not here to place judgment, but I do know some people in my life where I did wonder, like, is that therapist helping? Because they focus so much on the past. I think some therapists, maybe it's just the different fields, do tend to get stuck there. And there was one person, and it was kind of like, okay, is this therapist going to move you into present day, or are we just going to live in the past forever? So I will say time and a place for sure. I'm not saying therapy is to be discredited whatsoever, but I do like to put in there as a note that even though the people I know that have transitioned from being therapists to coaches have said, because coaching is about moving forward and about growing. And I will say also healing. Not and therapy is good for dealing with the trauma of the past, obviously, again, time and the place. But I do really love, and not to toot our industry, but like I feel like coaching really is important, just because we are really about staying in the present and then growing and moving forward. And I don't know much about counseling, but I'll have to put them on the same level as us.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of great therapists. I saw a therapist for the first 6 months after my husband died, just because I thought I was going crazy with everything that I was feeling and going through. And it was extremely helpful. And then I got to the point where I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to figure this out on my own now, and tap into a lot of the leadership coaching and my resilience and strength, that I knew how to I felt like I was ready to move myself forward. And so, I think everyone's different. Everyone needs something different. Certainly people who are dealing with extreme trauma, therapists are critical. But for people that want to say, this is not where I want to be for the rest of, like, I didn't want to be sad and lonely for the rest of my life. I am, I still probably have more than half my life to live, God willing, right? Like, my grandmother lived to 96. Like, I got a long time to go. I lived to her age. We don't know what the future will hold. We have no idea, right? But let's say I still have more than half my life to live. How do I want to live that? And how would my late husband want me to live that? Like, that was where I focused, was like, I knew he would not want me. We just moved into this new house in this new town, and we were so excited to be here. And I knew that he wanted me to enjoy that. And so it took a lot of time to get there, to be mentally, physically, emotionally ready to say to myself, okay, what's the life you want to live, and how are you gonna create that for yourself? So yeah, I don't, I think sometimes in the acute stages of grief, therapy can really help a lot.
Mhm.
But when you've made that shift in your head of like, this is not where I want to be, and I need help to move to the next step, that's certainly where a coach can be extremely helpful.
Yeah, they're ready to move forward and well,
Yeah.
it just pops into my head. Things always pop in my head, but like to move out of the shadows into the light again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Okay, so if we have Brendan, if you have any questions, I did mute you. So if you have a question, you'll have to unmute yourself. And if you don't unmute yourself, I'll take that as no question. Is there anything else you want to add? I will put in the description for the video. I'll put your group, your page, your website, all that information in there. Is there anything you wanted to add? Any little side notes for anything? Anythings?
No, I would just say, obviously I'm honored to work with anybody that would trust me with their grief. And if you're not sure if the coach is right for you, or you're not sure if I'm the right fit for you, like, just on my website, you can schedule a free 30-minute consultation. You can just go online, find a time and a date that works best for you. And we can do that over Zoom and just talk and just say, sometimes it's like, yeah, maybe this isn't the right fit. Maybe this isn't what I need, or yeah, this would be great. So don't hesitate to reach out. My email's on there. I'm on Facebook. You can hit me up on Messenger. I'm on Instagram, on LinkedIn. So whatever platform is best for you, don't hesitate to reach out. And however I can help you, I will do my best to do that. And thanks so much for having me. It was a great conversation to think about how we think about what you're focused on with anxiety and stress, and how that layers in with grief.
Yeah, that was super interesting, and I definitely learned some things. So I'm so grateful you came on and were willing to do this. I think it is, and especially because grief is such a complex thing. On a good day, for if people handle it well and they weren't too close to someone, like it's very complex just in its nature. So yeah, I'm glad. And as I stated before, last person that should give grief advice right here. So I'm glad that you were able to come on and just kind of start that. And yeah, and it's one of those, there's so many different areas of like our lives, like even if we're going through X, Y, Z plus A, B, and C over here, to just have those different resources and just to know, like, there's lots of people, we're out here, we can help whatever you're going through. And yeah,
that's right. Yep, we talked about it in the interview. Ask for help. Don't be ashamed.
Seriously, I feel like that's like every day. All us coaches should just post once a day. Ask for help. Ask for help. You should ask for help.
There's a lot of resources and people that want to support you. So
exactly. All right. Thank you so
Sonia.
much. And hopefully we will talk to you sometime again in a nice professional, I don't need your services anytime soon kind of way.
I know. It's one of those things you don't want to know about it until you need it. But yeah, I hope not either. But yeah, thanks a lot. It was great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.